We are back as promised with Rebecca Patterson. She's the global head of foreign exchange and commodities at JPMorgan Private Bank. Rebecca, before the break, we talked a lot about China, but there's other countries out there that are seeing some pretty significant growth. Our neighbor to the north, Canada, we saw a big move with the loonie, reach parity for the first time since July 2008. I mean, it's a huge commodities play. How interested are you? How much advice are you giving to your clients about buying Canada dollar?
Well, it hasn't been our favorite only because the yields in Canada are not as attractive as places like Australia or Mexico or Brazil that are also commodity plays to a degree. So policy rates in Canada right now only 25 basis points, but Canada does have a lot going on. As you said, commodities, but they also have a very small current account deficit. They have a very small budget deficit, and these days that's a rarity. It's less than 3% of GDP, and the economy is roaring back, and partly because their banking sector didn't get hit the way ours was. We think they're going to be raising interest rates as early as July this year, and so it's going to be becoming a yield play.
I was just going to say, can Canada's loonie become a new reserve currency?
Well, not replacing the dollar, of course, but in terms of a currency central banks are diversifying to, absolutely. You know, with all this focus on the euro, I'm sure there's lots of central banks and sovereign wealth funds around the world going, oh God, what do we do now?
They don't want to buy the euro. You think that there's been a huge psychological effect?
Well, huge is a big word, but definitely yes. That's part of the reason central banks are buying more gold, and they are buying less liquid currencies like the Canadian dollar. In fact, I believe the Russian central bank earlier this year announced it was going to be adding more Canadian dollars to its reserves.
All right, well, the U.S. has another neighbor, right? I mean, Mexico, the peso hit a pretty key level this week as well. Is that something you're advising clients to get into?
Yeah, Mexican peso has been one of my favorites for the last year, and I've fought with our Mexican clients over it because they've all been a little bit more cautious on their own economy. They weren't feeling the spillover from the U.S. recovery until really quite recently. But Mexico, 4.5% policy interest rates. In a world looking for yield, that's a nice number. Very small budget deficit, current account close to balance, commodity exporter. It's a nice story, and the currencies lagged until very recently the emerging market FX recovery. So I still think there's some way to go.
How much, Rebecca? You know, I'm always going to ask for the qualification.
That's fine. That's my job. We're at around 12.21, 12.25 now. I haven't checked my screen yet this morning on dollar MEX, but I think by the end of this year, assuming the U.S. can keep recovering, dollar Mexico could get as low as 11.80, 11.50. Technically, that's the next big support level.
So there's still some money to be made there. Any other commodity play? I mean, we always watch Aussie dollar in this context, and we've seen oil shoot up. I mean, today it's down for the first day, but in 7. 18-month high earlier this week, above $87 a barrel. We've been talking about copper, at least at year-and-a-half highs. I mean, a lot of commodities are on the move. Aussie dollar, is that one to play off?
Well, again, we've been involved in it now since last February, and it's run a long way. I think it's expensive. I think it's somewhat crowded, but I wouldn't be bailing out of it just yet, given that the Reserve Bank of Australia is still raising rates. China is doing very, very well, and Australia obviously exports a lot to China. So I'd stay involved in the Australian dollar. I think we can see mid or high 90s by the end of this year, but I'd be careful how you play it. Use options, limit your risk to premium, because if risk appetite falls apart and people take profit on this, it could fall quickly. So buy it, but be careful.
Rebecca, thanks so much for spending the time with us. Rebecca Patterson joining us there from JPMorgan Chase Private Bank. She is the head of global FX and commodities.